2:15 in the morning, the southern Philippine jungle. An Australian Special Air Service Regiment operator slid down a fast rope from a hovering Black Hawk helicopter into the black canopy. The heavy rotor wash thrashed the ancient tropical leaves. Cold rain slashed against the panoramic night vision goggles of the assault team. This was authorized as a standard hostage extraction, but the target compound below registered absolutely zero thermal signature. The earth beneath the target was older than human history, and tonight it was not empty. 2:18 in the morning, Headquarters Joint Operations Command in Bungendore, Australia. The primary watch officer stared at the main overhead display. The screen showed the infrared feed from a high-altitude drone. The Black Hawk helicopter was a bright white shape pulling away from the drop zone, but the ground below it was a perfect black void. The watch officer turned to the sensor operator. "The drone feed is malfunctioning." The operator shook his head. "Negative. The platform is nominal. We are getting a localized sensor blackout. Something is eating the infrared spectrum." 2:20 in the morning, the jungle floor. Operator Miller unclipped from the thick descending rope. His heavy boots sank into the deep wet mud. The rest of Alpha Team formed a tight defensive perimeter. The jungle was physically suffocating. The team leader keyed his encrypted radio. "Command, this is Alpha Actual. We are on the ground. Moving to the target." The radio crackled. The command voice was tense. "Alpha Actual, this is Command. Be advised, we have lost all thermal imaging of your specific grid." Alpha Actual looked through the dense foliage. "Command, I am looking right at it. It is constructed of concrete and corrugated steel, but my night vision is struggling to resolve the edges. The ambient light is bleeding." Miller lowered his rifle slightly. He noticed something wrong. The jungle insects were completely silent. That never happened in the deep tropics. The frogs and cicadas should be deafening. Tonight, the jungle was dead quiet. Alpha Team moved forward in a standard wedge formation. Their infrared laser sights cut through the light fog. The compound walls loomed ahead in the dark. No guards were posted at the gates. No fires burned in the open courtyards. Miller stacked up against the main concrete wall. He held up a clenched fist. The team stopped instantly. He pointed to the heavy wooden gate. It was already broken off its iron hinges. The thick wood was splintered outward. 2:25 in the morning. The perimeter of the target compound. Alpha Team moved through the shattered gate. Their heavy boots made soft sucking sounds in the deep mud. Operator Miller swept his rifle across the open courtyard. Nothing moved. The infrared lasers cut clean lines through the low mist. The team leader raised a clenched fist. He signaled for a tactical halt. 4 bodies lay scattered across the wet concrete. They were dressed in local syndicate tactical gear. Their assault rifles were still slung across their chests. None of them had managed to fire a single shot. Miller stepped closer to the nearest body. He crouched down. His night vision goggles whined softly as they focused. Miller spoke softly into the internal radio. "Actual, this is Miller. I have multiple contacts down. Local fighters." The team leader approached. "Confirm cause of death." Miller shook his head. "Negative. No visible trauma. No ballistic wounds. No blood pool." Their eyes are wide open. The team leader keyed his long-range radio. "Command, this is Alpha Actual. Be advised, the primary target is compromised. We have local fighters deceased on site. Cause unknown." 2:28 in the morning. Headquarters Joint Operations Command in Australia. The watch officer leaned forward over his primary console. The overhead display still showed a blank thermal void over the target zone. He spoke into his heavy headset. "Alpha Actual, this is Command. Confirm status of the primary hostages." The encrypted radio crackled with heavy static. "Command, we are moving to the main structure now, but something is wrong with the terrain." The sensor operator looked up at the watch officer. "Sir, I am picking up a severe seismic anomaly. It is localized directly under their specific grid." The watch officer frowned. "Specify the anomaly type." The operator typed rapidly on his keyboard. "Low frequency. It is rhythmic. It registers like heavy industrial machinery." The watch officer keyed the microphone. "Alpha Actual, we detect deep seismic activity beneath your position. Report." 2:30 in the morning. The center of the syndicate courtyard. Alpha Team formed a tight 360-degree perimeter. The ground beneath their boots was vibrating. It was a deep mechanical thrum. It rattled the ceramic plates in their body armor. Miller pointed his rifle at the mud in the center of the compound. The thick brown sludge was slowly sliding away. The team leader stepped forward. The mud cleared to reveal a perfectly smooth surface. It was not concrete. It was an advanced alloy. Miller swept more dirt away with his heavy boot. A massive metallic blast door was buried flush with the earth. It was easily 10 meters across. There were no hinges. There were no visible locking mechanisms. There were no markings. The team leader knelt down. He pressed his gloved hand against the dark metal. It was freezing cold. The ambient temperature was 30 degrees Celsius, but the door was covered in a thin layer of frost. He keyed his radio. "Command, this is Alpha Actual. We have located a massive subterranean structure. It is capped by a heavy alloy door." The command voice came back instantly. "Alpha Actual, is this a syndicate bunker?" The team leader looked at the dead fighters around them. Then he looked back at the impossible door. "Negative command. This is not local, and it was not built recently." The deep vibration suddenly stopped. A heavy mechanical clank echoed through the dark jungle. The massive metal door began to slide open. A pale blue light spilled out from the deep earth. 2:35 in the morning. The edge of the open blast door. Alpha Team stood over the massive subterranean shaft. The pale blue light illuminated the dense jungle canopy above them. A freezing draft of air pushed up from the deep earth. Operator Miller attached his heavy metal carabiner to the thick, fast rope. The team leader gave a sharp nod. The team leader spoke into his internal radio. "Alpha Actual to all elements. We are making entry. Keep your spacing tight." Miller stepped off the wet metallic edge. He slid downward into the cold shaft. The walls were perfectly smooth. There were no visible seams. There were no rivets. It was a single continuous alloy structure plunging straight into the solid bedrock. It took him 20 seconds to reach the bottom. That meant they were dropping over 200 feet underground. 2:36 in the morning. Headquarters Joint Operations Command in Australia. The main overhead display suddenly flickered. The digital status markers for Alpha Team turned from bright green to flat gray. The global positioning system tracking coordinates froze completely. The watch officer stood up from his heavy chair. "Report." The sensor operator typed rapidly on his illuminated keyboard. "Sir, we have lost all telemetry. Biometric monitors are gone. Position feeds are gone. Encrypted radio channels are returning dead static." The watch officer keyed his primary microphone. "Alpha Actual. This is command. How? Copy." Only a sharp hiss of white noise answered him. The assault team had vanished beneath the earth. The thick alloy roof of the mysterious structure was acting as an impenetrable electromagnetic shield. The watch officer turned to his communications director. "Ping the military communications satellite. Reroute the signal through the Black Hawk relay." The director shook her head. "Negative, sir. The entire grid square is a dead zone. Whatever they just walked into is actively jamming our frequencies." 2:38 in the morning. The bottom of the subterranean shaft. Miller hit the solid floor. He instantly unclipped his heavy carabiner and raised his rifle. His panoramic night vision goggles adjusted to the strange ambient blue light. The air down here was perfectly sterile. It smelled like compressed argon gas and cold steel. The rest of Alpha Team dropped in rapidly. They formed a tight defensive circle in a wide hexagonal corridor. The team leader tapped his radio earpiece. "Command, this is Alpha Actual. We have reached the primary floor. How? Copy." He heard nothing but static. They were completely cut off from the outside world. The team leader used standard hand signals. "Move forward. Maintain strict noise discipline." The Australian operators advanced slowly down the massive corridor. The architecture did not make sense to human eyes. The ceiling was 30 feet high. The floor angled slightly downward into the dark. Miller stopped abruptly. His jaw tightened. He heard the faint crunch of tactical boots on metal. It was a synchronized walking pattern. It was not coming from his team. The team leader raised a clenched fist. The Australian operators melted into the deep shadows along the smooth walls. A heavy tactical flashlight beam cut through the thin blue mist ahead of them. Then a second beam appeared. Miller looked through his advanced weapon optic. 5 men in heavy ballistic armor moved into the wide intersection. They carried suppressed assault rifles. They wore advanced night vision goggles. But their camouflage pattern was not local syndicate gear. It was a specialized urban gray. They moved with absolute military precision. The team leader immediately recognized the tactics. Bounding overwatch, professional spacing. This was a highly trained private military company. They were heavily armed. And they were already inside the vault. Neither side knew the other was there until this exact second. The corridor was narrow. The distance between the two armed groups was 50 meters. It was closing fast. In the subterranean hexagonal corridor, the lead mercenary stopped moving. His thermal optic caught a faint reflection off the helmet of Operator Miller. The mercenary raised his suppressed assault rifle, and Miller reacted instantly. His muscle memory took over, and he fired 2 suppressed rounds. The heavy subsonic bullets struck the mercenary square in the ceramic chest plate. The man stumbled backward into the deep shadows. The silent corridor erupted in blinding muzzle flashes. The sharp cracks of high-velocity rounds echoed violently off the smooth metallic walls. Bright orange sparks showered from the strange alloy floor. The Australian team leader dropped to one knee. He returned precise fire down the wide blue hallway. The unknown tactical team immediately bounded back behind a thick, angled pillar, moving with perfect unit cohesion. Both sides held their positions. The intense firefight lasted exactly 4 seconds. Professional discipline replaced initial panic. Neither force wanted to waste ammunition in an unknown environment. Behind the Australian defensive bulkhead, the team leader looked at Miller. He used rapid tactical hand signals. He pointed at his eyes, then pointed down the dark hall. He raised 2 fingers. 2 hostiles flanking left. Miller nodded slowly. He ejected his heavy magazine, checked the brass casings, and slapped it back into his weapon. The Australian operators waited in the freezing mist. They expected a heavy counterattack or fragmentation grenades to bounce down the hallway, but nothing came. The opposing force was equally experienced, evaluating the tactical geometry. A loud voice echoed from down the wide corridor, spoken in English with a heavy Russian accent. The mercenary commander called out, "Hold your fire. We are not your primary objective." The Australian team leader did not respond verbally. He kept his rifle raised and signaled his men to hold the line. They were not negotiating in the dark. In the shifting architecture, a massive mechanical groan vibrated through the solid floor plates. It was much louder than the previous seismic anomaly. The deep sound came from the walls directly around them. Miller pressed his heavy body armor against the cold, smooth metal. He felt the wall vibrating. Then he felt it moving. The entire right side of the corridor was sliding forward. The team leader looked back the way they came. The long hexagonal corridor behind them was gone. A solid slab of dark gray alloy had dropped silently from the high ceiling. It completely blocked their extraction route. The mercenary commander shouted again, his voice carrying a new edge of alarm. "Look behind you. The sector is sealing." Miller turned his head sharply. The vertical exit shaft they had rappelled down was completely gone. There was no visible door. The metal had simply closed like a giant mechanical shutter. There was no seam. The underground architecture was actively reconfiguring itself. The walls were physically shifting along unseen track lines. The pale blue light flickered twice, turning into a deep warning amber. The Australian Special Air Service operators and the unknown Russian mercenaries were now locked in the same sealed box. The ambient temperature began to drop rapidly. The team leader activated his high-lumen weapon light and swept the beam across the newly formed wall. The smooth metal was absolutely flawless. There was no way out. The vault had swallowed them both. 2:45 in the morning. The deep subterranean level. The massive alloy walls locked into place with a heavy metallic thud. The ambient amber light pulsed slowly. Then the sound began. It was a deep, sub-audible hum. It bypassed the ears and resonated directly in the chest cavity. Operator Miller felt his heavy ceramic armor plates vibrating against his ribs. The Australian team leader used rapid hand signals. Move forward. Stay alert. The only open path was a single descending tunnel. The shifting architecture was actively forcing them deeper. 2:46 in the morning. Headquarters Joint Operations Command in Australia. The primary watch officer stood completely still. The massive overhead display remained totally black. No telemetry, no radio signals. The localized sensor blackout had expanded. The infrared void now covered a 2-mile radius around the target coordinates. The sensor operator looked up from his dark screen. Sir, the seismic anomaly is increasing in magnitude. It is no longer a localized vibration. It is a continuous harmonic resonance. The watch officer spoke softly. What does that mean? The sensor operator typed rapidly. It means the entire subterranean structure is powering up. 2:47 in the morning. The mercenary holding area. The Russian private military commander tapped the side of his heavy helmet. His advanced night vision goggles were flickering violently. White static washed across his display. He pulled the thick optics up and away from his eyes. His men did exactly the same. He looked down his weapon optic. The illuminated red dot was dead. The internal batteries were completely drained. He checked his backup radio. It returned nothing but a sharp hiss of white noise. The commander gave a tight hand signal to his 4 remaining men. They had to move. The sealed corridor forced them down the exact same descending amber tunnel as the Australians. The maze was deliberately bringing them together. 2:48 in the morning. The primary convergence point. Operator Miller stepped out of the narrow corridor. He lowered his rifle slightly. The enclosed space suddenly opened up into a massive circular chamber. The high ceiling disappeared into the dark shadows far above. The floor was a single piece of polished black metal. The sub-audible hum was much stronger here. It made the cold air feel thick and heavy. Miller noticed his weapon laser was dimming. The bright green beam sputtered and died. His panoramic night vision goggles shut down completely. He pushed them up onto his heavy helmet. He relied entirely on the ambient amber light. Across the vast circular floor, a heavy set of metallic doors slid open. 5 figures stepped into the amber light. It was the Russian mercenaries. They had been channeled into the exact same room from the opposite side. The Australian operators and the Russian mercenaries stopped moving. They were 30 meters apart. There was absolutely no cover. 10 assault rifles raised simultaneously. The distinct metallic clicks of fire selectors echoed sharply in the massive room. Both highly trained factions committed to the standoff. Neither side fired immediately. Both teams realized their advanced electronics were dead. They were aiming with iron sights in the dim light. They were blind and trapped together. The deep hum grew louder. It was no longer just a vibration. It was a physical pressure pushing against their bodies. The amber lights began to spin in a fast circular pattern along the high walls. 2:49 in the morning. The central chamber. 10 men stood frozen on the black polished metal. The distance between them was exactly 30 meters. No cover existed. No shadows remained. The amber light spun rapidly along the smooth circular walls. Operator Miller held his heavy rifle steady. His green weapon laser was dead. His night vision was useless. He looked straight down the iron sights. He aimed directly at the chest of the Russian point man. The Russian mercenary mirrored the exact same stance. His suppressed rifle did not waver. Both men were elite. Both men knew the tactical reality. A firefight in this open room meant mutual destruction. Everyone would die. The Australian team leader spoke loudly over the rising mechanical drone. "Lower your weapons. You are completely exposed." The Russian commander shouted back, "You lower yours first. We hold the perimeter." Neither side moved a single muscle. The standoff was absolute. 2:49 and 15 seconds in the morning. Headquarters Joint Operations Command in Australia. The primary watch officer gripped the edge of his console. The overhead display flashed a bright crimson warning. The massive localized sensor blackout was now producing a massive seismic spike. The sensor operator shouted over the loud alarm klaxons. "Sir, the harmonic resonance just spiked off the scale. It is registering as a localized earthquake. Magnitude 4.5. The watch officer stared at the dead telemetry feeds. "Are they still down there?" The operator shook his head slowly. "The epicenter is dropping. Whatever is making that sound is moving straight down into the bedrock. Fast." 2:49 and 30 seconds in the morning. The standoff. The deep sub-audible hum shifted pitch. It became a deafening roar. The sound violently shook the heavy ceramic plates inside their body armor. It felt like standing directly behind a massive jet engine. Miller tasted blood in his mouth. He clenched his jaw tight. The acoustic pressure was immense. The Russian mercenaries dropped into wider combat stances. They tried to keep their balance. The solid black metal beneath their boots was vibrating violently. The spinning amber lights on the walls suddenly locked into place. They turned a blinding white. The shadows vanished instantly. The Australian team leader keyed his dead radio out of pure instinct. Nothing happened. They were entirely on their own. 2:50 in the morning, the chamber floor. The deafening roar peaked. A massive mechanical crack echoed through the massive room. Gravity failed for a fraction of a second. The entire black metal floor detached from the circular walls. It dropped straight down into the deep earth. Miller felt the sudden weightlessness. The heavy combat load on his chest pulled him forward. He fought to keep his weapon raised. The Russian point man floated off the deck for a half second. His thick combat boots kicked empty air. The platform re-engaged with a brutal slam. Gravity returned violently. The descent speed increased exponentially. The wind pressure tore at their loose gear. Miller narrowed his eyes against the rushing, freezing air. The white lights on the vertical walls became a solid, continuous blur. They were traveling at terminal velocity straight down. The Russian commander fell to one knee. He kept his rifle aimed upward at the Australians. Miller staggered but held his ground. The air grew freezing cold. Condensation ripped past their heavy helmets. They were falling hundreds of feet per second. The underground structure was impossibly deep. 2:50 and 45 seconds in the morning. The descent. The platform deceleration hit them like a physical wall. Miller dropped to both knees. The heavy artificial gravity compressed his spine. The floor groaned under the massive sudden strain. The Russian mercenaries slammed hard against the cold metal. Their weapons clattered across the deck. The platform screeched against the smooth vertical walls. Bright blue sparks showered over the 10 men. The massive elevator came to a violent and sudden halt. Total silence returned. The deafening roar vanished completely. The blinding white lights snapped off. The chamber went absolutely pitch black. Neither the Australians nor the Russians could see their own hands. 2:51 in the morning. The pitch black chamber. The 10 men knelt on the freezing metal floor. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed loudly. The absolute darkness was suffocating. Operator Miller kept his rifle raised toward the last known position of the Russian pointman. He pressed the activator for his weapon light. Nothing happened. The battery was not dead. The entire electrical circuit was completely drained. A sharp hum vibrated through the air. It was different this time. It was a high-frequency whine. 2:52 in the morning. The weapons check. A wave of invisible energy washed over the platform. It felt like walking through a wall of static electricity. The hairs on the back of Miller's neck stood up. The heavy ceramic plates in his armor grew instantly warm. Miller heard a distinct mechanical click in the dark. It came from the Russian side. The Russian commander spoke into the blackness. His voice was tight. "My trigger is fused." Miller immediately checked his own weapon. He pulled the charging handle. It would not move. The internal bolt carrier was welded solid. The ambient heat from the energy wave had micro-welded the high-carbon steel. The advanced assault rifle was now just a heavy club. The Australian team leader reached for his tactical belt. Check sidearms. Check fragmentation grenades. Miller pulled his pistol from its heavy holster. He racked the slide. It was locked tight. The primer compounds inside the 9mm ammunition were completely inert. The advanced energy field had actively neutralized every piece of chemical explosive and moving metal in the entire room. 2:54 in the morning. The stasis wall. A soft geometric pattern appeared on the far wall. It did not turn on like a light bulb. It grew organically. Thin lines of bright cyan light traced out of the solid dark metal. The light expanded rapidly across the massive circular room. The Australian and Russian operators stood up slowly. Their useless weapons hung from their tactical slings. The illumination revealed the true scale of the deep chamber. It was easily 100 meters across. The wall directly in front of them was not solid metal. It was a massive window of thick, translucent crystal. Miller walked slowly toward the glowing barrier. The Russian point man walked up right next to him. They did not aim at each other. The combat dynamic was completely shattered. Behind the thick crystal wall, 4 human figures floated in midair. It was the missing Australian mining executives. They were suspended in a pale blue liquid stasis field. They wore the exact same civilian clothes they were captured in. Silver metallic tendrils connected to the base of their necks. Their eyes were closed. Their chests rose and fell in a slow and unnatural rhythm. 2:55 in the morning. The shared realization. The Australian team leader stopped beside the Russian commander. Both elite soldiers stared through the thick alien crystal. The advanced medical technology was centuries ahead of anything on Earth. The Russian commander dropped his heavy rifle. It hit the floor with a dull thud. This was not built by your government. The Australian team leader shook his head slowly. It was not built by yours either. The local syndicate did not capture the miners. The syndicate was just bait. Something buried deep in the earth was collecting human specimens, and now it had 10 highly trained additions to its collection. The cyan light in the massive room suddenly shifted to a deep warning red. 3 o'clock in the morning. The deep containment chamber. The warning. Red light washed over the 10 men. Operator Miller unslung his heavy, useless rifle. He let it fall to the solid black deck. The Australian team leader and the Russian commander stepped away from the massive crystal wall. Their advanced combat training offered no protocol for this environment. The Australian team leader spoke calmly. "Your weapons are completely dead." The Russian commander nodded. "Affirmative. Our explosives are also inert. We are effectively disarmed." Neither man reached for a tactical knife. Close quarters combat was completely pointless. They were trapped thousands of feet underground in a machine they did not understand. The primary mission parameters were completely erased. Survival was now the only mutual objective. 3:05 in the morning. The automated purge sequence. A harsh mechanical klaxon echoed through the massive circular room. It did not sound like a human alarm. It was a rhythmic and piercing metallic scrape. The temperature inside the chamber began to plummet rapidly. Miller watched his own breath turn into thick white clouds in the red light. The heavy lights on the walls began to strobe in a descending vertical pattern. The Russian point man pointed toward the dark ceiling. The overhead vents are opening. Thick silver gas began to pour down from the high shadows. It moved like heavy liquid. Where the gas touched the black metal floor, thick frost crystallized instantly. It was an automated cryogenic purge. The facility was actively sterilizing the biological contamination in the primary access chamber. 3:08 in the morning. Headquarters Joint Operations Command in Australia. The main overhead display flashed with a new data stream. The sensor operator sat up straight in his heavy chair. He spoke loudly. "Sir, the localized sensor blackout is lifting, but the thermal signature is dropping at an impossible rate." The primary watch officer leaned over the brightly lit console. "Clarify the thermal drop." The operator typed furiously on his keyboard. "The target coordinates are registering at minus 50 degrees Celsius. The cold anomaly is expanding from deep underground. Sir, that entire jungle grid square is flash freezing." The watch officer stared at the screen. The mission had escalated far beyond a standard hostage rescue. 3:10 in the morning. The containment chamber floor. The freezing silver gas pooled around their heavy combat boots. The brutal cold bit straight through their advanced thermal layers. Operator Miller felt his knee joints stiffening. The cryogenic fluid was slowly rising. The Australian team leader looked at the Russian commander. "We need to breach the crystal wall. The medical stasis field is completely isolated from the purge gas." The Russian commander unclipped a heavy titanium pry bar from his back panel. It was a purely mechanical breaching tool. It contained no electronics and no explosive primers. He handed a second heavy bar to the Australian team leader. "We swing together. Aim for the lower structural seam where the crystal meets the metal deck." Miller stepped forward immediately. He drew his own heavy steel entry tool. The Australian special operators and the highly trained Russian mercenaries lined up side by side. 10 elite soldiers raised their manual breaching gear. They had exactly 2 minutes before the cryogenic liquid gas reached their chests. The Australian team leader gave the sharp command, "Strike." Heavy steel slammed into the thick alien crystal. The brutal impact echoed over the deafening mechanical klaxon. The translucent barrier did not shatter, but a microscopic fracture line appeared in the glowing cyan surface. The Russian commander raised his titanium bar. Again, they hit the wall harder. The deep geopolitical lines of combat were completely erased by the freezing reality of survival. 3:15 in the morning. The containment chamber. The 10 men swung their heavy steel tools in perfect unison. The titanium bars struck the glowing cyan fracture line. A deafening crack echoed over the mechanical klaxon. The massive crystal barrier shattered inward. A wave of heavy, pale blue liquid collapsed onto the black metal floor. It washed over their combat boots. The strange fluid instantly neutralized the freezing silver gas. The automated cryogenic purge stopped immediately. The deep red warning lights flashed to a flat gray. The 4 suspended hostages fell forward onto the hard deck. The silver tendrils detached from the base of their necks and retracted silently into the dark wall. The Russian commander knelt beside the nearest civilian. He checked the carotid artery. The Russian commander looked up. He is alive, but his core temperature is impossibly low. He is completely unresponsive. The Australian team leader slung his dead rifle over his back. He hoisted a catatonic mining executive over his broad shoulder. We have the primary targets. We need to move before this facility resets. 3:18 in the morning. The vertical shaft, a violent mechanical shudder shook the massive chamber. The solid black floor beneath them engaged an unseen lift mechanism. It shot straight upward through the dark vertical shaft. Operator Miller braced his boots against the smooth metal. He supported the dead weight of a second civilian. The Russian point man held another. The ascent was brutal and completely silent. There were no cables. There were no gears. The technology defied basic human physics. The Australian special operators and the Russian private military contractors stood shoulder to shoulder. They watched the smooth metallic walls blur past them. The tension remained high. The temporary alliance was born of pure survival. They were still heavily armed soldiers from opposing global factions. 3:28 in the morning. The jungle surface. The black platform slammed to a sudden halt. The massive metallic blast door above them slid open. The humid night air of the Philippine jungle rushed into the sterile shaft. It smelled strongly of wet soil and heavy rain. The 10 operators carried the 4 silent hostages over the heavy alloy lip. They stepped out into the deep natural mud. The local frogs and cicadas were still completely silent. The Russian commander turned around to look at the open shaft. The deep seismic harmonic resonance returned. It rattled the thick jungle canopy. The massive blast door slid shut with a final heavy clank. The ground vibrated violently. The smooth metal surface began to sink straight down into the ancient earth. The surrounding mud rapidly collapsed over it. The impossible vault was actively burying itself deeper into the planetary crust. 3:30 in the morning. Headquarters Joint Operations Command in Australia. The primary watch officer stared at the massive overhead display. The localized sensor blackout suddenly vanished. The digital status markers for Alpha Team flashed from flat gray back to bright green. The global positioning system tracking coordinates immediately stabilized. The sensor operator typed rapidly on his illuminated keyboard. "Sir, telemetry is fully restored. Biometric monitors are active. I am showing 14 live contacts on the surface." The watch officer keyed his primary microphone. Alpha Actual. This is command. How copy? The encrypted radio crackled with heavy static. Then the Australian team leader answered. His voice was exhausted but steady. Command. This is Alpha Actual. We have the 4 primary targets. They require immediate medical evacuation. The watch officer leaned forward. Alpha Actual. Confirm the status of the secondary hostile contacts. A long pause carried over the open radio channel. The team leader looked at the Russian commander standing in the dark jungle. Command. There are no hostiles here. Send the extraction birds and tell them to hurry. 9 o'clock in the morning. Headquarters Joint Operations Command in Bungendore, Australia. Operator Miller sat in a sterile white debriefing room. He stared straight ahead at the blank wall. His posture was perfectly rigid. The heavy exhaustion rested deep in his bones. The Australian Special Operations Commander sat across the metal table. The physical evidence lay directly between them. It was Miller's fused assault rifle. The commander pointed at the heavy weapon. Our metallurgical engineers cannot explain this. The internal steel components are bonded at a molecular level, but there is absolutely no heat damage to the exterior polymer grips. That is physically impossible. Miller spoke quietly. Nothing down there obeyed our physics. The commander pushed a thick paper file across the table. The Russian military contractors were picked up by a fast attack submarine off the coast. We tracked their extraction. We let them go. They did not want to fight any more than your team did. Miller nodded slowly. They were highly disciplined. They helped us carry the civilians out of the vault. 2 days later, the secure subterranean data vault. Military analysts from 5 allied nations reviewed the localized sensor blackouts. The recorded seismic data was completely terrifying. The subterranean structure did not simply bury itself in the deep mud. It moved horizontally through the solid tectonic plates. It traveled at 60 miles per hour. It plunged deep into the planetary mantle and vanished. The 4 mining executives remained in a highly secure ward at an underground medical facility. Their core body temperatures rested at an unnatural 30 degrees. They did not require ventilators. They did not require intravenous fluids. They simply existed in a suspended biological state. Advanced medical imaging showed profound structural changes to their neural pathways. Something had systematically rewritten their minds. The Russian government sent a heavily encrypted back-channel message to the Australian military. It contained no geopolitical threats. It contained no demands. It was a simple and unprecedented sharing of classified telemetry data. The Russian military satellite network recorded the exact same deep energy spikes. 3 days later, the final strategic assessment. The global superpower competition suddenly felt completely irrelevant. Generals and politicians quietly evaluated their most advanced weapon systems. If a buried automated facility could instantly neutralize chemical explosive primers and fuse high-carbon steel, modern militaries were useless. A ballistic missile submarine or a stealth bomber was just expensive dead weight against that level of electromagnetic control. The world governments kept the jungle event completely classified. The local Philippine syndicate was officially blamed for the civilian kidnapping. The syndicate leadership was quietly erased by a coordinated drone strike. The deep tropical jungle quickly reclaimed the massive depression in the wet mud. No missiles flew. No major wars started. But the strategic reality of the entire planet shifted permanently in the dark. The sky returned to blue. But nothing felt normal. Both nations learned the exact same truth. The most advanced weapons ever built by human hands can be stopped by something neither side controls. The elite special operators did not uncover a secret military weapon. They accidentally tripped an ancient burglar alarm, and whatever built that alarm is still actively watching.